Hi, I'm Dubber. I'm the director of Music Tech Fest, and this is the MTF podcast. Our guest this week is someone you probably haven't heard of. David Peris is not what you might call a household name, but the people who have heard of him, well, they're household names. David's beavering away behind the scenes, pushing pixels, manipulating HTML, and he's been on speed dial for A-level rock stars since before streaming, before Napster, before MP3 players. His is a fascinating story of how the son of an Indian immigrant went from watching MTV in his bedroom to partying on an aircraft carrier with the Fugees, hanging out with Jeff Buckley in his office, and managing the online profile of a bunch of people you've heard of and whose records you own. I had the chance to sit down and have a chat with David Peris for the MTF podcast a little while back, and just like I imagine he had with Tori Amos, Thievery Corporation, Sheryl Crow, and Roger Waters out of Pink Floyd before me, he gave me his business card, and it didn't say what I thought it would. David, thanks so much for joining us. Your business card says you're a digital plumber. What's that exactly?
Well, it's a title I kind of came up with because, sort of the web developer, web designer, CTO, whatever those existing titles are, I don't feel sums me up. So in essence, what it is the guy who kind of makes everything work, or the expensive guy you call when you're trying to fix things, right? So, something's broken on my website, my social media is glitchy, this and that. I like this word plumber because in essence, that's what it kind of gets down to, right? I'm actually in the trenches fixing things as opposed to telling somebody else, hey, do this, do that.
Right, but the really interesting part to the story, of course, is the clients for whom you are a plumber. I mean, you've got a fairly sort of, do you want to do some name dropping for us?
Sure. So my main client, we've been together 20 years, is Roger Waters, formerly of the band Pink Floyd, who people might be familiar with. And Roger and I have worked closely together for, 20 years. First on his website, of course, and then came along this thing, social media. So I do his Facebook page and maintain his Twitter and handle his Instagram with his creative director, Sean Evans. And Roger texts me, emails me, WhatsApps me, which is wild because I drove to high school listening to his music, and never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be texting with the man who wrote the songs.
Right. How did that come about?
So my story is I went to college in New York City. I went to NYU. And in 1995, I was working in the computer lab and I was playing with something called Netscape Navigator. And one of the first websites that opened up for me was, for whatever reason, the Sony.com website. So I was looking at TVs and whatnot, and I clicked on their music division, and they had a very primitive website back then. And there was a little blurb saying that their music division was looking for a webmaster. I didn't even know what a webmaster was, but I thought potentially I could get free CDs, and that to me was very, very exciting.
That's why I got into radio.
Oh my God, free CDs, $18.99 each, Tower Records. So I sent in an email from my college account, and they said, yeah, sure, come in for an interview. And I went to the Sony building, 55th and Madison, now condos, I believe. But I went there, and they said, you're great, and you're a computer science major, you're perfect, but you're still in school. This is kind of like a real job. How would you do this? And I said, I don't really know, but maybe I could be like an intern or consultant or something. So they said, good idea. We'll give you $10 an hour, and we want you to make websites for our artists. So my classic story is, half my notebook was like calculus or whatever from college, but the other half was meet with Ozzy Osbourne at 4 p.m. and sit down with Mariah Carey and work on the website for Michael Jackson and Ricky Martin. And, it was ridiculous. And it was the real people. It wasn't like I was working at Madame Tussauds, wax museum, these are the tribute bands or something. So it was unreal to me as a music fan,
How old were you at this point? Just out of curiosity.
19, 20.
Yeah. So this is, you're still a student and impressionable young man.
Yeah. And this is all new. You have to understand, like the web was just at its infancy, right? So the Sony artist websites, as I remember, was a gray page with one photo and a bunch of little links. And that's all you could really do back then. It was very primitive. So, I would do things like build a contest form in Perl, if anyone's familiar with that old programming language, and praying it was working and stuff. And I would put it live on our website, which was one page. Win 2 tickets to see Mariah Carey at something. And I'd put it live, and I was like, I wonder if anyone's going to see it. And then I would look at the text file where I was collecting all the entries, and 100 people had entered in a minute. And I was like, oh my God. So I became not only a web developer, but in some ways I was like a broadcaster. And I was broadcasting to all these fans of these artists. And these are pretty popular artists whose fans had just started using the web.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Did the artists kind of embrace it as an idea, or were they cautious about it? What was the response like?
I think there was a little bit of caution. And by the way, this is all pre-Napster and all that stuff. There was no piracy per se going on before CD burners and stuff. But I think there was a sense of, number one, what the hell is this? Mm-hmm. But number two, because they're artists, they always want to express themselves. That's the nature of it. So, sometimes you hear from an artist, I turned in my CD and I'm so tired of it, right? You hear that idea because they've been living with it for a year or something. And the web, I think, gave them a way to express themselves away from an album cycle or away from, a song or going to a radio or whatever, going to an MTV, if anyone remembers what that is, going to those places and talking about themselves. And they could do it themselves without a gatekeeper. So the best artists that I would work with did blogging before it was called blogging. I had bands like Cypress Hill, write up these, we call them stories from the road, where they would basically write up what they did at Lollapalooza, and they would send digital pictures to me, very small resolution, of course. And we would essentially do blogging, for these artists. That's what was called content. The big thing was like, we need content for the website, content beyond the album cover, beyond the track listing, beyond the real audio samples. We need content. So largely the content came directly from the artists, yeah. And that was fun because you were going to the artist website and you're getting exclusive content that you couldn't find anywhere else. Yeah.
Right, wow.
Yeah.
I guess sort of if this is pre-blogging, then blogging comes along. Blogging kind of comes along with RSS.
Yeah.
Did that change the game for you?
Yes and no. I think blogging, what was interesting is a lot of the artists sometimes went rogue, and they would set up their own websites because they could. I don't remember any cases where, it was becoming a real problem, but oftentimes, they would want access directly to their site, and they would post things without the record label's knowledge. And you were always kind of curious, what are these guys posting? And, hopefully we'd get notified. I'd build something into a script saying, hey, send me an email whenever Harry Connick Jr. puts up X, Y, and Z. But yeah, this is the idea that they could control their sort of, it was like having a magazine, but they didn't have to go to the editor. They could just publish whenever they wanted, which is kind of terrifying when you think about it. And I remember some instances, like we had a band, I believe it was Toad the Wet Sprocket, if anybody remembers that band, who announced their breakup on their website without telling anyone. They broke up because they published with some script that I made, and it was up on their website before they told anyone.
Right, without alerting the record label.
Yeah.
And I guess that you were in the employ of the record label, not the artists.
That's correct. At the time, I worked for Sony Music, yeah. And then in 2007, I left and went out on my own.
Right. Before that, 99 hits, Napster comes out, everything goes into a panic. Yeah. How did that affect what you did?
It was dramatic and swift, and I'll tell you my first interaction with Napster. It's interesting. But I was 24, 25, and I was dating someone who was, in the midst of college. And I walked in her dorm room once, and she was really busy on her laptop. And I looked at her and said, well, what are you doing? It's like, I'm playing with this thing. It's called Napster. And I was like, what's Napster? And she said to me, oh, it's great. You type in a song, and you hit submit, and you can download it. Mind you, there was no streaming or anything at this time, so I know this sounds primitive, but you could download it. So, well, how do you pay for it? She said, no, you don't pay for it. You just download it. And I immediately got on the phone and called my boss. I was like, have you heard of this thing called Napster? Oh my God. And she was like, yeah, everyone in the dorm is using it. Because in the colleges, obviously, it was one of the few places you had high-speed bandwidth.
Sure.
Even I think the bandwidth at the college was better than what was in the office.
Right.
If I remember right. So, yeah, I was just blown away. Like, oh, wait, this MP3 thing, and I think this is around the time of the Rio player and all this. So MP3 was still kind of in its infancy. But just this idea that kids were making playlists with music that they didn't buy from iTunes, and it was wild. So the next thing that came along, of course, the record label was, oh my God, there was some MP3 trading, of course, on the web. Yep. Click here to download the MP3, and we would have to call our friends at the RIAA and shut that down and this and that. It was a whack-a-mole. It was cat and mouse. But this changed the game because it was decentralized, of course, as everyone knows. There was nothing to shut down. So the label and everybody else, went into a panic, and it was crazy times. And before that, the big thing was the CD, and we were selling millions of Celine Dion CDs in a week, right?
Uh-huh.
So I remember going to parties like on aircraft carriers when the Fuji sold 10 million CDs. Crazy things. The money was there, right? So it was very much a turning point, and it was very dramatic, and it happened out of the blue and quickly. And
wow! Before we go on with that story, the idea of you partying on an aircraft carrier with the Fugees and starting the story as a computer science student who wanted to just sort of build websites because it's a tech thing.
Yeah.
How did you get there, at least to that point? Because obviously there's a design element in web development and plumbing, as you put it.
Sure.
But so what does the child David want to be when he grows up that takes him to this place?
First of all, I'm not a musician. I've never really played an instrument. I've tried, but never really got into it. I don't think it's a natural talent of mine. But when I fully embraced music was probably 14, 15, and I watched a lot of MTV and things, and one of my earliest memories of just really falling for music and sort of the quote-unquote power of music, if you will, was I saw the video for Sunday Bloody Sunday by a band called U2, and this crazy guy with a mullet, and a like wife beater shirt walking around the stage at Red Rocks in Colorado, and he was so charged up and amped up, and he was running around to the flag and climbing things. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's crazy. And I love the song, as many people do, and it showed me that music was more than just the REO Speedwagon or whatever on the radio that my parents would play in the background. It had this power, it had this thing, and this guy, this young crazy guy with a mullet was like, you could tell like he might have died that night, for this thing that they were creating. I don't know, not to be dramatic, but anyway, that really swept me into music. And then I was very fortunate that I had friends in high school who weren't into sports, who, we weren't into girls for various reasons, because high barrier or whatever. But we didn't have a lot of distractions. There was no internet, anything. But the one thing we really fell in love with was collecting music. And you would have to go to this record store thing or the mall, have $30, $40, $50 to buy 2 CDs, and we collected music, on CD. And it was such a thrill. And then we would DJ and all this stuff. And that was the thing. So I'm very grateful to the friends that I had who really helped me realize, like, this is what you like. This is what you're into. And I was very passionate about it. Yeah.
You mentioned your parents, and other than their REO Speedwagon fandom, what can you tell me about them? What did they do, and how has that affected where you've ended up?
My father was an anesthesiologist. Immigrated to this country in 1974 and was doing his residency at Yale University, where I was born. But he immigrated from India and was at Yale, and I was born in New Haven, Connecticut. And my mom was a librarian at the college, and then we lived there for a year and then moved to a cold place called Buffalo, New York, if anybody knows that. O.J. Simpson was my neighbor, O.J. the murderer. It was a very good childhood, But again,
Other than living next door to a murderer.
yeah, it made it interesting. But my parents weren't musicians or anything like that. But my dad had a very large vinyl collection that I recall. He had a Marantz audio system, which looking back on it, like, I'm not sure where the hell my dad had such fine taste and hi-fi equipment. But yeah, I remember very clearly, like he had high-end stuff.
He had the good gear.
Yeah, and I was oblivious. I was just, playing with my, Tonka trucks or whatever. But yeah, he was into it. And I guess it rubbed off in some weird way. I'm not a super audiophile just because you can never have the right gear that you want, and you throw all this money at it. So, I've dabbled, but I'm not my dad, I guess, in that sense. But yeah, it was a childhood where they didn't push me into anything, even though I'm an Indian kid. It's like, you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a lawyer. And I'm very grateful for my parents that they allowed me to follow my passion, which was, music and technology. I don't think they ever quite understood what I did. My mom was the tough one. She was like, what is this? Why can't you do what your friend's doing? It's like, I don't care about what they're doing. I just don't care. Money is not why I'm here or whatever. I want to do what I love. Like, so, but, I think, they were proud of me because they knew I was happy. Yeah. Very thankful for that. And, they got a kick out of all the free CDs.
Was it deliberate, this idea of merging tech and music together?
It wasn't deliberate. I mean, I really fell into it, and I am so grateful because people will ask me what I do, and I'll give them the quick spiel, and they're like, "Oh my God, how did you?" They're just kind of in disbelief. Not only the celebrity aspect, of course, but you found your calling. You found the thing that you love. You found the thing that if they stop paying you, you'd probably want to do it anyway, right? Like, sure. Yeah,
but don't tell them that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But there is such a thing as people who never really found their calling or their passion or what they love. But I'm one of those people. I got very lucky, and there are some people in my life who I'm very grateful for, on a sort of career level, who gave me trust, to work with these artists and, trust that I wouldn't screw it up and I wouldn't embarrass the company or embarrass the artist or the management or whatever. There was a lot at stake, with a lot of these high pressure live events. And, we signed this band for $10 million and we're releasing the single on the website, blah, blah, blah. I have all these stories of those things. And, and it's not working in a hospital, but with any job, there's stress, There were definitely stressful moments, we're not launching nuclear bombs or anything, don't get me wrong, but there were times where it's like, oh my God, there's
a serious economic impact on some of these things.
Absolutely.
Presumably
we have the brand new single from Michael Jackson, or playing it on his website. You better not let that website crash, David.
Wow.
So, there were some times where things were crashing. There was no cloud at the time. There was no,
So you were running the servers, you were, doing the whole back end stuff.
I was running the servers. I was doing the plumbing for all this stuff. Yeah.
Okay. But you're no longer with the labels. You're actually working directly with the artists now.
That's right. So, Roger's one of my main clients. Other websites that I maintain and host and developed are for the great artist Tor Amos, the band Thievery Corporation, the artist Sheryl Crow, a terrific band called Lucas Nelson and Promise of the Real. It's great. And
does it help to like their music?
It does, but I'll tell you, if you really like their music, it's kind of terrifying because you're sort of you're shaping the image and the public persona of someone you have a lot of respect for because you love them. Mm-hmm. So in essence, sometimes it helps, I won't say not like their music, but not be so into them because it gives you this leeway where you're not worried or stressed out like, oh my God, am I representing them in the right way? Because you're kind of unfamiliar with them or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, when I work with certain artists, like there's my favorite artist. One of them is a guy named Jeff Buckley, and it meant the world to me. I knew him. He would hang out in my office typing, again, pre-blogging, sit in my chair for 3 hours and this and that. And I did his website, his first official website. Stressful, man. You love this guy and you want to represent him. And I'm not a designer. I'm not an artist. I just kind of put things together based on people much more talented than me. I take assets and I fuse them together. I'm kind of like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. If you remember that movie, he had a great speech. He said, I'm not really that smart. I just take things that are built by people much smarter than me, and I just kind of put them together. I feel like Jeff Goldblum. I'm not.
You have to be very specific about which movie you're talking about.
I'm not. I'm not an artist. I'm okay with Photoshop, but I really just take things and put them together.
The thing that surprised me when we first met, and you were talking about what you do, and you were doing this kind of sort of, with these phenomenal clients, doing web development, and you said, "Oh yeah, I use WordPress." I went, "Hang on, I use WordPress. Why aren't they my clients?" Sure. So what is it that you do exactly from a technical perspective?
Yeah. So good question. The technical perspective, honestly, is everything from the domain name, of course. So there was a time in my life where I had a portfolio of 5,000-6,000 domain names, all Sony related, artist related, record label related, etc. So anyway, I got very familiar with the world of domain names. So, with an artist, they'll come in with a domain, or I'll register it or whatever. Or, there are cases where you have to get the domain and have it transferred. And I have all kinds of stories. I got BillyJoel.com back from a fan, RogerWaters.com was with a fan, and those are very careful negotiations. So anyway, from a tech perspective, the domain, I'm very familiar with the world of web hosting, which has obviously gotten easier over the years, but had been tricky. And then finally, it's a case of the website infrastructure. So back in the old days, everything was flat. It was like one HTML page, some images and things, but this content management world of WordPress and things has made things much easier. So, yeah, I'm involved in setting up the hosting and the CMS and what this thing's going to look like, and either working off a template or doing something from scratch and making sure it's responsive, of course, these days, and everything can be visible on a phone, etc. And then finally, the day-to-day maintenance. Roger Waters calls and says, "Hey, I want this on my website or this on my Facebook page. Make it happen, and do it right now."
Right.
So yeah.
I guess when you're Roger Waters, you can do that.
I'm happy to.
And are you doing when you say you're sort of doing the Facebook page, doing the Twitter? Are you actually the social media content creator?
Well, yes and no. So working with Roger, obviously has a very, very clear and precise vision when he says, "I want to put this up and I want it to be about X. And I wrote this text, and can you go," and either he'll supply an image that he found or shot or whatever, or he'll say to me, "Hey, go find an appropriate image for it." And I'll go and look, and if it meets Roger's approval, it's part of the post. Or I'll work with his great creative director, and he'll supply something to me. So I don't mean to ever make it sound like I'm doing everything or this and that, but no, it's a very much a team effort. These artists have teams,
right,
and nothing just kind of happens. But what's amazing about Roger, and not to keep going on about him, is he's a star, he's a superstar, and I have this one-to-one relationship with him. I'm not going through a manager. I'm not going through any middle person or his publicist or anybody. He's actually reaching out to silly, stupid me, and it's kind of crazy when you think about it, right?
Is there any point at which you say, actually, Roger, I don't think this one's a good idea?
There have been cases, but pushing back on somebody like that is not really what you want to do. But no, I think in most of the time, like, he's right on, and his stuff that he posts is largely political, if you're familiar with Roger Waters, and sometimes polarizing, but that's his point of view. He's an artist, and he does not take kindly to people who say, why are you mixing politics with music? How dare you? And he's like, well,
That's what it's for.
why can't I?
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating argument. But yeah, working with Roger's a treat. Yeah.
Fantastic. Is there some insight that you could give to people who, for instance, if they're artists but they're not Roger Waters, what they should be thinking about on their website? Is there sort of like one top tip that you go, you know what, you should think about doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the number one thing, honestly, is try to put some personality or quote unquote content on your website that is straight from you and is not part of your album package or publicity pack or what have you. It's your freaking website. Make something, do something, put up something that somebody can't get elsewhere, whether it be on Amazon's, you're the retail page for your album or a fan site or whatever. I think the key is to have things that make, there's a lot of talk, oh, well, artists don't need websites anymore. And, nobody needs a website anymore. Is the web dead? Blah, blah. It's kind of like saying scooters are the new car, it's people. Yeah, of course, people will always need websites and they'll always be looked at and this and that. But you have to make them attractive, because if you're putting all the quote unquote good stuff on your social media, yeah, your website's going to die like, a plant dies if you don't water it. So you have to give your website some love the way you give your Instagram feed love. And these people give, all their social media lots of love because obviously they're getting instant feedback. But people are still going to your website. You might as well put some good stuff there.
Still getting invited to aircraft carrier parties?
No, I am not. But I still have some fun for sure. Yeah, I'm very grateful.
David, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, of course.
Cheers.
Thank you.
David Peris, digital plumber to the stars. And I really love that kind of modest view behind the scenes of some of the biggest artists on the planet through some of the biggest seismic shifts in recorded music history. But I guess that's one of the real stories of music tech. And that's the MTF podcast. If you enjoyed, and why wouldn't you, make sure you hit the subscribe button, go like, share, rate and review, and tell someone you know. Go and water your website, have a fantastic week, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.